We pursue the Ottomans into the depths of the Sinai desert, a place so vast that I feel insignificant, so timeless that I think of those who have come before us. This will truly be a battle from Roman times. Like them, our objectives are cities with mythical names: Jerusalem, Nazareth, Damascus. If the ruins around me could speak, they would warn us of ourselves.
Salutations, Sandstorm Surveyors. Automatic here for Automatic Games. Thanks for joining me for this standalone episode, part of my overall Battlefield 1 series. We're back in the Middle East. Since the Suez, we've chased the Ottoman forces into the Sinai Peninsula. We're east of El Jafar, where we intend to engage them, and of course we'll be talking about a little historical context as we go along. So with no further ado, let's kick it off with a cinematic.
We have sighted the Ottomans, men. They are dug in ahead of us at the ruins of Sonsus. We must capture this position and force them back into the canyon of Jabal. There we must rout them, so they retreat to the outpost of Bir el-Mazar. This is our chance.
Now, as is customary with some of these multiplayer maps, the soldiers or officers that we'll be playing as, their names will be right up there in the top right-hand corner of the screen. In this case, it's going to be Captain Walker, which is a name that might be familiar. He was initially featured in the Alfal Peninsula episode, or the Fortress Foul episode, where he incurred slight wounds, but apparently recovered and is back in action, this time in the Sinai Desert. Now, the Ottoman forces in this vicinity, historically, were primarily commanded by Colonel Friedrich Kress von Kressenstein, and they would undergo a series of both defeats and victories on varying scales. A point I should make is he was a better commander than Jamal Pasha. There's no question about that, in my mind anyways, although Pasha was one of the commanding figures in the Ottoman Empire. And speaking of the Ottomans, let's talk about the state of the Ottoman Empire during World War I. They were highly influenced by the Young Turks movement. Perhaps you've heard at least the phrase the Young Turks. In modern day terms, it may harken to like a liberal podcast or YouTube channel that I do not subscribe to. Kind of pseudo news, very partisan, very politically charged. But that initially, what the Young Turks movement was, and also today, I mean, one might call somebody a Young Turk, and what that would kind of indicate is that that person that you're referring to is an agitator or somebody for reform. Somebody that's going against the grain. Now, the Young Turks, prior to the 19-teens, they launched a movement that they rebelled against the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and they ushered in an age of political parties in the Ottoman Empire. Namely among those parties, and there were a couple of them, but the CUP, and I forget what that stands for, but they were a highly nationalistic party who advocated military advancements, kind of a modernization of the Ottoman military. To that extent, one of the things they did was they bought a couple dreadnoughts off of the British Empire, and they paid toward it, but the British reneged on giving them the dreadnoughts because World War I sparked, and the British wanted to maintain the most powerful naval force in the world, which of course is something that they enjoyed during World War I. But as a result, that kind of made the Ottomans take yet another step further away from the Allied powers. In fact, the straw that broke the camel's back with that didn't have to do with Great Britain per se. It was that Russia declared war on the Ottoman Empire, and Russia was a member of the Triple Entente, which is tantamount to the Allied forces. The Triple Entente being Russia, Great Britain, and France. Later on in the war, we would just refer to this group as it grew as the Allied forces, much like we did in World War II. But yeah, it's a no-brainer. Once Russia declares war on you, you're best to side up with the Central Powers at that point. And certainly the German, Austro-Hungarian leadership welcomed the Ottomans with open arms. Not that the Ottoman Empire had the most powerful military in the world or anything, far from it, but as a obvious side effect of them throwing in with the Central Powers, Great Britain was going to have to extend its military forces even further, to defend their Middle Eastern holdings, their colonial holdings, as it were. More specifically, to keep a thumb on that oil that they would need. I mean, they were already launching ships by this point that were going to run on oil. So they would need that, and their ever-expanding war machine would require it further as time progressed. Now, in essence, who can blame the British Empire on a strategic level for wanting to protect their holdings and things that would be of importance logistically? Now, I'm not trying to imply that the Young Turks movement is directly responsible for the Ottoman Empire joining the Central Powers. However, they did lay the foundation through their democratic reforms that allowed a group like the CUP to come to power via rigged elections, intrigue, the whole 9 yards. In fact, it kind of reminds me of the French Revolution, or something of the like, where people are clamoring for democracy, and so you have this violent revolution, and all you get is a Napoleon Bonaparte, a General Bonaparte who declares himself emperor. Not really what you were going for, was it? But since you broke up the powers that be, something like that was able to emerge. I've mentioned Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, mentioned him in the Gallipoli videos, and he was no fan of the Young Turks movement, had quite a bit to say about them. And yeah, highly critical of them, but then again, Mustafa Kemal kind of, to me, he strikes me as a more totalitarian figure, so he would have something to say about them, even if corruption wasn't hand in hand with the results of the Young Turk movement. Now, we will talk more about the Ottoman Empire, because the next series I'm going to be presenting is Nothing Is Written, which kind of focuses on the Arab revolt of the time, so the Ottomans, of course, play an instrumental role in that. But I'd rather switch gears and talk about Battlefield as a whole. Now, if you've not been able to infer from my commentary, I'm kind of obsessive when it comes to military history. Primarily the American Civil War, the Plains Indian Wars, and World War I. And of course, who isn't intrigued by World War II, but frankly, for me, that's overshadowed by World War I. I mean, the old adage is that the sequels usually suck. And all war sucks, of course, but I tend to gravitate towards World War I. In fact, this is the first Battlefield 1 game that I've ever owned. And I don't know if I've said this in another video, but I would say stop me if I have, but you can't. Really can't. You can only say it in the comments, and all said and done then. But yeah, as soon as I saw the commercial for Battlefield 1, I was sold. I said, well done, DICE, you got me to buy a Battlefield game. Which is really, it's not in my wheelhouse, and you might see that reflected on how poorly I do at a first-person shooter. Yeah, I have nothing to boast about in that department. There are some issues that I find with Battlefield 1. It seems like most of the content is in and around 1918, which is fine, and I kind of understand why they did that. They didn't want to focus on stagnant trench warfare, although they could have had a level where the sides were literally separated, like you couldn't cross to the other side. I don't know the ins and outs of how they would do that, but for me, one of the most intriguing time periods of World War I would be the first month. August of 1914, where these empires are ramping up very quickly, and in that month, I mean, that was the bloodiest month of the war, okay? And we're talking a massively bloody conflict overall. But yeah, August of 1914 was the worst. In fact, on August 22nd, 27,000 died in one day. And the bulk of those were French. Because, of course, that initial month was the death of Napoleonic warfare, because you had rank and file running into modern mechanized, not mechanized, but modern weaponry. The Maxim machine gun. I mean, this is what you had. You had people marching in column, and they run smack into the Germans, who are bringing technology to bear on them. And between the artillery and the machine guns, the result is 27,000 people die.
Return to the combat area.
Now, I don't know how you would reflect that in a video game. In fact, well, I take that back. I mean, if you're familiar with a game called Valiant Hearts, they kind of touched on that, and that game in itself, it's cartoony, but it's got very dark undertones, and it was very tastefully done. But in fact, I think they even have a level where you engage in a bayonet charge at the beginning. You know, just marching up behind your banners, and you break into a charge. Nobody's wearing helmets that early. I don't know, and they couldn't have replicated that on a multiplayer platform, because no modern-day gamer is gonna just fall in and become part of a firing line out in the open. They're just not gonna do that. Everyone's gonna want to camp or go find a nook. But I think in the single player, in the campaign mode, they could have done that. They could have forced the player into the rank and file. Or, God forbid, they let you play the Central Powers. I mean, these aren't the Nazis or Tojo's Japan, after all. I mean, I'm not... Yeah, you know, I mean, they did employ unconventional warfare, and they broke with the Geneva Convention on many fronts, but yeah, these aren't the swastika-wearing, goose-stepping Nazis that we see in World War II. So I don't understand why in the campaign mode they didn't let you play as any of the Central Power factions. But yeah, those are some of my grievances with it, and then obviously they're not serious grievances, and maybe with some of the DLC we'll see aspects of the European theater in 1914, 1915. I would look forward to that personally. Yeah, just the whole idea. I mean, to envision Napoleonic warfare going up against what we consider to be more conventional weapons of the 20th century. It's mind-blowing, folks. And I guess that's another thing that you don't really see in Battlefield 1. You do see carnage, but not the dismemberments, not the... Some of the horrors of the war are absent. And maybe you don't want to put that into a game, but I think when it's done right, it properly reflects how terrible the entire conflict was. I'll get off my high horse on that note, but yeah, I mentioned Valiant Hearts. That's definitely, if you're interested in this time period, that's a game worth checking out. I'm sure it's available in the Microsoft Store. If you're interested in this and you want something a little more highbrow, or if you're like me, if you love to read this stuff, I mean, I read John Keegan. Although he's not my favorite historian, that's the book that I most recently read, John Keegan's The Great War. When it comes to first-hand accounts, Ernst Younger, I mean, there's a plethora of them. Now, as far as multimedia is concerned, I'd highly suggest The Great War, which is a YouTube channel that does kind of this 100 years ago today kind of deal. 100 years ago this week, and they walk you through World War I. Another one would be Blueprint for Armageddon, which my friend just kind of told me about recently. Thank you, Kyle. That was awesome. And that's going to be Dan Carlin. And he touches on a lot of the points that I've touched on, but of course, each one of his episodes is 3 hours long, so he's got a lot more he can say. But I'm restricted by time, as I am in this current video, so if you like this, Thanks for watching. I'm Automatic for Automatic Games, and I'll talk to you soon, friends. Now, I've never done this before, and I don't intend to make a habit of it, but this opportunity calls for a bonus reel. The reason being is I participated in one particularly laggy experience, although there was some redeemable footage. That being this little vignette of Private Bowen. And I wanted to share it with you. Up ahead, panic-stricken soldiers are taking cover behind this little lip, but bullets rain in on them. One of those bullets catches Bowen, but there's a medic nearby that sees to his wound. Despite the terror, there, like the Rock of Gibraltar, atop his horse is a British officer, inspiring confidence and compelling his troops to move forward, and so they do. And here comes the air burst, the high explosives, the incendiaries, one of which catches Bowen, the Union Jack. A Mark V rolls up on our left, and from our right, here comes that medic. Bowen expresses his gratitude and is soon back on his feet and out in the open, progressing forward, but they're hampered by this chlorine gas. They'll move up and position themselves by this knocked-out 77. That rocky outcropping ahead just crawling with Ottoman soldiers. Now that's an imaginary line, and we can't move forward until we hear the whistle from our officers. And so by default, we've created a bit of a firing line, no, rather a skirmish line, since there's some feet in between us, and the Mark V opens up on the outcropping, and the Ottoman soldiers above it are gone. Battlefield 1 does present some moments that are just striking, and I kind of thought this to be one of them. In the background, you're hearing a song called Little Trinketry from the soundtrack to Valiant Hearts. I find it to be a rather poignant piece. The whistles are blown, we start to move forward. Bowen accidentally steps on a flare, his pant leg catches fire, but he will douse it. Unfortunate that there was lag, because I would have loved to have added this footage to my video. I'm a sucker for good footage. And if you like these videos and you like epic footage, and you missed the last video, Friends in High Places, the final episode, be sure and check it out. It's got some really cool Zeppelin stuff happening in it. There again is that officer, bullets whizzing by his head, but he remains unflinched. The rest of us are scampering about, but not he. So Bowen retrogrades. There's a little bit of that lag I was referring to. And unfortunately for him, Bowen's just got moments left before he's whisked back to a field hospital. And so that'll conclude this footage. But I appreciate you giving me a few minutes to share it. I appreciate you watching. I have the honor to be your obedient servant. O.Matic.